Hello guys, welcome. This is the Mac version of the introduction tutorial to Rhino. So just a reminder, if you have a PC, please make sure to click on the PC version as we get started. So the two are going to cover basically the exact same things, maybe in slightly different orders, but should give you a good sense of how the interface of Rhino works and how you can begin to navigate the program. Once I finish this, then for the most part, most of the tutorials are going to be only on the PC version of Rhino, but anybody with a Mac should, by that point, be fairly easy for you to follow along because you'll know where to look for things and how to move around in a similar way. So let's go ahead and get started with this Mac version. So as you can see, I've opened Rhino and I have my viewports, and there are 4 of them right in front of me. And then I have on the right-hand side, I have these sort of properties panels. On the left-hand side, I have here, sorry, that was from before, but I have here what looks like a bunch of commands, and then some information about the way that the interface is functioning, and additional information here at the top, right? So that's basically, those are the different quadrants of areas that I'm seeing when I first open the program. There's also, you will notice that there are a bunch of tabs all the way up here, and all of those tabs have additional commands, which are essentially like additional buttons. We will talk briefly about those, but really what I want to do is first talk to you guys about the viewports. Afterwards, I will talk to you about commands, and after commands, a little bit about setting up your interface correctly, which is down here, so that things line up and your projects sort of match what you expect them to and align to the things that you want them to be aligned to, so that they are accurate to your designs. Okay? We are going to essentially ignore this panel, these sets of panels for today, although this one we will just see briefly. And we really aren't going to talk very deeply about any of the commands themselves too much today. So it's just an interface. So the first thing, let's talk about the viewport. So as you can see, there are 4 viewports, and I have sort of quickly modeled a cube. And you can see the cube in its perspectival view, in a top view, which is essentially a plan, in a front view, and in a right view, which are essentially elevations, right? And this cube is made up of these lines that produce the surfaces. And as you can tell right now, right here in this viewport, you can see the line work, but we can't really see the surfaces that make up that cube, right? So one of the first things to know about your different viewports is that they have a bunch of information that you can access about them and modify about them if you click on their names. So if you double click on the name without doing anything else, it'll just like pop up that screen as the full size. And if you double click again, it'll bring it back down to that 4 viewport view. Now, if you right click on that name perspective, right, it's going to give you a lot of options. And these are the ones that we need to remember. Remember to right click so that we can see these and have access to them. So as you'll notice, if I right click on perspective, you'll see that the wireframe view option is what is currently selected. So if I change that to shaded, then you will see that now I can see the surfaces of the model that I have, of the cube that I've made, right? So if, just for you guys to remember, that wireframe is the default setting on Rhino. And so as you're building things, if you build a surface and you're like, well, why isn't it showing up? It's probably just because you haven't changed your viewing setting so that you can see surfaces, right? And you can see down here that there are a lot of other options as well. And so aside from wireframe and shaded, there's also rendered, which creates, and this will take just a second, a kind of rendered version, which tries to simulate light, although it really is not in any way accurate to the way that light actually behaves. But you can also see here that we can see it as a ghosted. That way you can see it's kind of through the front planes into the back planes, as an X-ray view, etc. You can even have kind of a pen view if you want it to look like it's been hand-drawn, those kinds of things. I tend to just work between wireframe and shaded, and I tend to keep my perspectival view with a shaded and the other views, my top, front, and right, in the wireframe. So that's how you really see things in your viewport. You can also change your viewports or change what view angle you have of your viewports. The same thing, you right click, and then here you see set view, and you can choose from a top view, a bottom view, etc., etc. You could even choose an isometric view, right? And so when I look at this as an isometric, this view looks somewhat similar to this one, but in reality, right, these are vastly different, because this view here is a parallel line drawing, and this view here is a perspectival line drawing. So in terms of their projections, they're very different, although they both produce what looks like three-dimensional views, okay? And we'll talk about the difference between those two at some other point. But just to remember that you can always set your view to be something other than what is the standard, okay? So that basically covers the information that you need for now on how to control your viewports. So now let's talk about actually doing things, giving Rhino commands and acting on those commands. So as you can see here on your left-hand side, there are a bunch of buttons. Those are all different commands. So one way to start a command is actually just to click on any one of those buttons and start performing that command. So in this case, you can see here that I am building a polyline. And so that's one way, and you can sort of like hold and wait for a second. It'll tell you what that command, what the name of it actually is. So for example, that's a circle with this where you specify the center and the radius. This is a polygon, same thing, you specify the center and the radius, etc. Right? So that's one way to try and select a command. Another way is to just start typing the command that you want to do. So for example, I could type the word rectangle, press enter, and now I can build a rectangle, right? And so you will notice that it's your command line is always on. You do not have to go and click on the command line before you start typing. You can actually just, wherever you are, you can start typing, and it will type onto that command line. So I could type polygon, and it'll try to figure out what you're typing, so you have to be careful, but you can do polygon, right? And in this case, the default setting for a polygon is a polygon with three sides that are all equal in length, right? So if I want to do a polygon that's a different shape, different size, so I would type polygon. And then you will see that as soon as I type it, all my buttons disappear, and I get a panel that asks me what things I can change. So I could change the number of sides here. So I could put 5 instead. I could, and then I can affect the edge, the star condition, its vertical arrangement, and etc. You can play with these. These are just, for example, just for a polygon. But if I just click 5 and now I click, you will see now that I'm starting to build a pentagon instead of a triangle, right? The polygon command, for example, only builds equilateral polygons. There are different ways to build other things. right? So just remember that almost all of the commands have, even for example, rectangle, have different options that you can turn on and off once you type the command over here on the left-hand side, okay? So that's essentially how you start building typing commands. One of the really important things about commands is that if you type them in, so if I type in polyline, you have to press either enter or space to turn on that command. So you type the word, then you press enter. And then when you want to stop using that command, you press enter or space bar again. And that stops that command, okay? In terms of polylines, which are very useful and we'll use a lot, if you actually start working on the command, and then you come back to the starting point, it automatically creates a closed polyline and ends that command, okay? So there are, that's a different way in which sometimes commands will end if you've finished the number of actions that are required of that command, okay? So that's another important thing to know about commands. Some of you guys might be asking at this point, okay, great, I can type commands, but how do I know what commands are available to me? And the answer is there are a lot, and you kind of just have to learn slowly what they are. You know, it takes a little bit of practice. At the beginning, you know, it's easy to start, you know, just pressing these buttons, but you can also, underneath all of these tabs, all of these are actually commands. So any one of these words, if you type them, that itself is a command. So you could always just look for these ideas. And also, of course, you can, if you want, select a command from any one of these tabs. So I could do a plane, based from corner to corner, and now that is a command and I'm building a plane. Okay, a plane and a rectangle are somewhat similar, as you can see. Okay, so those are the three different ways in which you can start building commands. So that gets us largely through how we interact with Rhino. So as you guys have noticed, as I've been building things over here in my command history, it's been keeping track of all of the commands that I've done so that I can see what they are, and it will actually tell me the command name and what has been done to it. Okay, so this is just a history of whatever is happening on the command line. It can be sometimes useful to see certain things or why something went wrong, for example. Okay. And then finally, as you guys start building, right, you want to have some control of how you both move around in the viewport, right, and how you control how things snap to other objects and sort of the accuracy of things. So those are the last two things that I'm going to cover. So in terms of moving around in Rhino, there's really three ways in which we move around in 3D space. We zoom, right? We pan, and we rotate, right? So those are the three, and a combination of those three is how we sort of negotiate all the different angles and views that we want in order to correctly model things. So how do you do each of those three? So the first one, the easiest, and on Mac, I'm showing you guys how to do this just with the trackpad. On PC, I've shown you how to do it with a mouse. But so for this on the Mac, if you want to zoom in, you do that sort of stereotypical Apple command for zoom, which is that, right, like you move your fingers, two fingers away from each other, right? That zooms in, and if you bring the two fingers close towards each other, that zooms out, right? So that's zooming. That's standard for how Apple does zooming in all sorts of different programs, right? So that gets rid of the first one. If you want to pan, you hold the shift key, and then you, with two fingers on the trackpad, you can move and you can pan around your object. So you have to be holding shift in order for this to work. If you don't hold shift and you just put two fingers, then you rotate, okay? So that's how you do all three. So remember, if you want to pan, you have to hold shift and use both fingers to move around on your trackpad. Okay, so that's how we navigate inside of our viewports. And finally, in terms of accuracy and being able to ascertain where things are landing exactly in your model, we have a series of additional sort of snaps and information that exist here and here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn all of these things off for to talk about them, and we can now talk about each of them individually. So your grid snap is just, if you turn it on, and then you'll see sort of gets highlighted like that, it means that whenever you're working, you will sort of by default snap to points on your grid. Now the grid is just a kind of based off of whatever unit system and the scale of the unit system that you have selected. So it's a little bit of an arbitrary snapping positioning system. So I actually tend not to have grid snap on, but you're more than welcome to. But that's one way to snap onto a certain set of information on the model. Another thing to note is that then you can also be you can use the ortho, and you can sort of see that I had it on beforehand because basically everything that I was making was orthogonal to itself. And so if it's not on, you will see as I'm drawing this polyline, it's sort of like it can go everywhere, right? And there's really no logic to this, which is totally fine, right? And if you want to be oriented towards the orthogonal grid that is outlined by your base x, y coordinate system, your base plane, then you can turn ortho on. So once you do that, then you'll see that kind of all of your things want to begin to align to that x and y axes, okay? So I usually tend to toggle ortho on and off depending on the kind of work that I'm trying to do. Sometimes I want to make sure that things are orthogonal. Many times I want to make sure that they're not orthogonal. And so on that you're acting off. Important one is this smart track. So this smart track is what allows you to select your snaps. So you'll see that when I have smart track selected, now I can toggle on these commands, and so you'll see that means that, and I've already pre-selected end, near, point, midpoint, intersection, and perpendicular. And so that means that as I'm going ahead and starting a new line, you will see that I will automatically snap to the end, and in this case, this end is also an intersection of this line and this line, right? I will snap to a midpoint. I will snap to the perpendicular. I will snap anywhere where it says near, it means anywhere on that line, actually, right? And again at that end or that intersection. Now, if I had a point randomly somewhere else, it would also snap to that point because I have point selected. Okay, so it's really important that you guys have your snaps on and that you keep them on. You can toggle between, sometimes you don't want to be snapping to near, you want to snap only to certain things, you know, so you can turn certain ones of them on and off. But for the majority of the time, my recommendation is to have end, near, point, midpoint, intersection, and perpendicular on, and that will make sure that when you guys, you know, snap onto something, you're actually hitting those points. And so this object and this object, you know, perfectly align at that intersection, and therefore they share continuously that line right there. Okay, so that is the snaps area. There's additional other ones here, but we really won't talk about them at all this time, and probably not at all throughout the semester. That should give you guys a good sense of how to get started with the interface. Of course, you won't really be able to understand it completely until you start playing around with it. So I encourage you guys to just open up and start trying to make a couple things, and then see how you can begin exercise 1. So that is the end of this tutorial. I hope it was helpful. Please, guys, let me know if you have any questions or if you need any help in particular.